Good morning. Two hands, both hands. I'm in early position, open raise again. And hand number one is pocket sixes. So this is a 25 NL game. We have 7 players at the table right now. I open raise three big blinds, and we get a call by the cutoff. I only have 3 hands on this villain, so I really don't know, how he's going to play. Out of those 3 hands, he's played a third of them. This will now make 50% of hands. So kind of we're flying blind as to what he could be playing. Um, I'd say with the cutoff, he didn't 3 bet. So I think what we can do is kind of put together somewhat of a more default range, um, a default calling range for 25 NL. And he's in the cutoff. He is playing, I'm early position, so I open raised and he calls. So I would think that most players are going to be raising with queens plus, probably jacks plus. I'll say jacks plus. He'll probably raise with ace king, probably raise with ace queen suited. I think he's going to call with the suited broadways. I think he probably will call with suited connectors. I think he'll call with ace jack, ace queen, king queen off. Um, he doesn't. He only has 3 hands on me too, so he can't really be playing, adjusting against me. Uh, that's 10% of hands where he calls an open raise. Of the hands he's played, so all of them basically he called the pre-flop 2 bet. So should we include the suited aces? I think we probably should. That gets him to 13%. That's probably suitable uh, for this unknown. So against that range, pocket sixes uh, isn't going to be doing, it's not going to be stellar. It's still going to be favored because we have a pair, but there's a lot of overcards that can come, especially Broadway cards that could come that'll beat us. However, with a lot of these Broadway cards, we have the potential of firing a continuation bet and winning because they might give us credit for having the ace or a king. So we take it to a flop, 9-9-2 with 2 hearts, and we have to think about how we were going to proceed now that we have this flop. So I'm looking at this flop and thinking this flop is going to miss most hands. If I'm ahead, I'm probably still ahead, but my hand's kind of vulnerable. So if I check, a 10 or a jack, or maybe even an 8 or 7 can come and will beat me, and that'll give villain a reason to call. So I kind of feel like we're going to have to fire a continuation bet at this point, and recognize that we may get called by someone who is sticky, who's not going to believe that we actually have a hand. Now, I think 10 jack, queen 10, jack 10, king queen ace jack. I think those hands are likely going to fold, but like the ace high hands will probably still call. Um, and not everyone does that, but you kind of have to assume that if I know that this hand's going to miss a lot of hands in the range, he has to assume the same thing about my range. So that's why I say ace high hands may call because he could be thinking that I'm going to fire out a continuation bet with a 10 jack or a king queen and so forth. I bet 2/3 pot looks like, and villain calls. So now that he calls, what does he have? Uh, I would think that if he has a 3 of a kind, that he would likely raise. I think if he has an overpair, he would likely raise. I think full house and quads will likely just call. Pocket pair below top pair probably calls. Middle pair calls. I'm going to say the ace high hands are going to call. flush draw calls. 2 card backdoor flush draws. I don't think they're going to call. So we're getting called by 68.2% of his hands. We're at 62% equity. So I still think we're ahead. What do we do on various turn cards? I think if it's an overcard, we're gonna have to fire again. We're gonna have to fire again, and likely probably pick it up. Because I think if we fire again, we're going to be able to get the pocket pair, below top pairs, middle pairs to fold. Catch is the ace high. If an ace comes, that ace, 53% of his range will include an ace. So we're kind of at ace is good, but if an ace comes and he calls, we have to give up. We have to give up, and hope we hit a 6 on the river. And it gets checked through. So turn is the 3 of hearts. I think now we still have to bet. We still have to bet as if we're not afraid of this heart draw, because I think we still have. He's still going to have hands that he could possibly fold. So of course the flush full house quads, those aren't going to fold. That represents 23.7% total. But pocket pair, below top pair, I think can fold. Middle pair can fold. Weak pair can fold. I think we're looking at 31%, 32% of hands can likely fold now. So I think we should take advantage of it. Question is, how much should we bet? Well, if we bet half pot, then we need him to fold what? We'll see. So the pot's 17.24. If we go ahead and bet, let's say 9. So we bet 9 to win. 9 plus the pot. We need him to fold 34% of the time. I think he has 32% in pocket pair, pairs below the over pairs. I think he has. So if we just kind of say, what hands is he going to call with? I think that he calls, 29, 30%. He's going to fold the rest. So I think we can bet, 9 bet, half pot, and expect to generate a lot of folds. If we think he's going to be sticky with a half pot, if he views half pot bets as being weak, then we may have to go 2/3 pot. So let's change this. Let's say we, instead of 17, let's say we bet 13. So now we have to win 43% of the time. I think we can do that. So we should bet probably the larger sizing to try to maximize fold equity. We don't want to make him think 7s or 8s can call. So we want to kind of rep that we have an overpair, and now we want him out. I didn't. I checked, and then he bet. And the question now becomes, after we check and he bets, what could he have? He's kind of representing that he has at least a pair or a really good draw. So I think he is representing at least overpair plus, probably the nut flush draw, maybe even the second nut, but it's. I don't have him with the ace. So I think he's kind of representing the same kinds of hands that he would have called had I bet. And at that time, I'm only at 21%. If I think he's going to be betting with, let's say, his entire range, just because I showed weakness, now you can see that I'm at 55%, and we're getting the odds to call. Right? We need 33% equity to call. If he's doing this with all of his range, then we have a pretty easy call. But if he's doing it with any pair plus, we're at 37%. We're kind of break even. Still going to be a little bit positive, but if we get rid of uh, some of these pairs, like the middle weak pair, the reason that helps is we're dealing with basically threes and twos, ace three, ace two. But I just don't know why he wouldn't just check behind those. Uh, and yeah, he could bet. So if we just do all pocket pairs and the nut flush draw, you know, we're at 38%. If we take out the nut flush draw, we're at 34%. We're like right at that break even point. I think we're okay to fold. It's kind of a weak fold, but we bet on somewhat of a dry board. We think he's going to fold all of his unpaired hands except the ace high hands. We can think of a lot of hands that beat us. Yeah, it's kind of weak because we're folding a pair, but he's telling us that he at least has something or a good draw. I didn't. I called. And then the eight of clubs comes on the turn. So we're going to leave any pair and this nut flush draw. So we're at 36% equity. Eight of clubs comes on the turn. That obviously doesn't help us. And now, it's up to us. Well, I don't think we can really bet. I mean, once we check the turn, I mean, why would we have checked the turn? Our play wouldn't make sense to check the turn and then bet again. I mean, when that heart gets there, yeah, maybe we have the flush, but why wouldn't we just continue and hope that he's going to raise us with a nine? Um, it seems like a strange way to play a flush. So we should check, and I think that goes back to our turn. When we were deciding whether to call or fold, we looked at the percentages, but we also have to look ahead and say, okay, if we call here, are we also going to call the river on a bad card like this, like on an 8 on a low card? And I think looking ahead, I'd say, if I check on the river and he bets again, I don't honestly think I can call because now he's repping something else. He could just check behind with an ace 2, check behind with an ace 3. He could check behind with sevens and eights and so forth and five. So I think there's many hands that he would have just checked behind that still beat us. So if he bets again, we're just going to have to fold, which means if we can't be prepared to just call down the turn in the river. And I think that leads us to a fold on the turn. We checked because, again, I don't think it makes sense to bet. We're not going to really represent anything, and he checks behind. And once he checks behind, I think you're going to have basically all the weak pair. I don't think quads checks. I don't think full house checks. I really don't think the flush checks. I think the flush is going to bet unless it's kind of a weak, one of these like 7-6 of hearts or 8-7 of hearts. So I think at this point we got lucky that we got to see a showdown. He shows queens, so he shows an overpair. Now we didn't have the overpair in his hand. We didn't have queens in his hand because we kind of assumed that on this board, overpair probably would have raised instead of called. And we assumed he would have raised his queens pre-flop. So now that he's in there, I still think we kind of miss it because I would have assumed on this board he would have raised with the queens with the overpair because there's a hard draw out there and he doesn't. You don't want to give someone with the flush draw a chance to beat you. But at the same time, I mean, the total heart draw is like 10% maybe. 10% of my range might have that flush draw. So on this hand, we lost. I didn't have queens in the range, but based on his play, we can rationalize his play is already representing that he has he has a decent hand, that he can at least beat sixes. So what we can do is make a note on this player, let him know that write down that he called a 2-bet pre-flop with pocket queens in position, that he and he didn't bet overpair on a mostly dry board. All right, so this is hand number one. Let me close things out and get hand number two. All right, hand number two is pocket jacks. Under the gun, this is 10 and L game. So we had a cutoff, posted the blind. So I raised 4 big blinds. Villain 5 calls. We don't have any information. This was his first time at the table. Small blind called. This is only his third hand. So we go three-way to the flop. So all we can do is really kind of set up a standard, 10 and L, calling range. So I think both of these, of the two ranges, I think small blind might be the tighter one. So I think what we are just going to do is set up something like, let's say 30%. Let's adjust and say I don't see a huge number of 3-bets, so maybe something like that for the 3-bets for at least the cutoff. Maybe all aces. I think that's probably a suitably wide range. I will copy that range and then bring in range number 2. All right, so this is a small blind, and I think with the small blind we will add those, but we will also tighten it up a little bit because they will be playing out of position. So I think they may have a slightly tighter range because they're out of position. I mean, it's still going to be somewhat wide. So 26.1%, I think works for them. My jacks against both ranges are going to do fairly well. So you can see almost 75% for that range, 73% for that range. I think we're looking okay. I don't like being out of position, but yeah, I'm okay with this hand. Now, once we get there, we have 13 big blinds. This player has basically almost 2.5 stack to pot ratio. So that's something if it was just up against him, I think I'd be willing to get it in against him, or look for a way to get all in against this villain. This villain's a little bit different. He's got 96 big blinds, so the stack to pot ratio is much larger. So on this board, we actually like it pretty well. We're going to be ahead of a lot of their range, and they've got a lot of hands right now that will call at least one bet, because this isn't really going to hit my range unless I have an overpair. So I think there's a lot of cards that are going to call a continuation bet. Villain 7 checks. I think he's going to check that with his entire range. That's normally what happens. If there's a donk bet, it could be like maybe a pocket pair, so maybe 9s or 10s. Oftentimes it's going to be like 8, 9, or something. They're just stabbing at the pot, but this is a 3-way pot, so I don't really expect it to happen in a 3-way pot. So he's going to check. We're going to say he checks his entire range. It comes to us. I definitely think we should bet. The question is how much we bet. I think this is a bet where we can easily bet 2/3 pot. Size it a little bit larger, maybe a little bit larger than 2/3. So maybe bet like 8 big blinds, because one of these players I think will likely call, and they're going to be calling as an underdog to us. So 8.6 is what I bet. I actually like that bet. I'm glad I made it that size. Villain 5 folded, so against this range, you can see that he had a lot of hands that he could have called with, but he obviously folded like his pairs, middle pairs, pocket pairs, top pairs. If he had those, he folded them. Same thing over pairs. So we're basically looking at pair plus was 35%, Open-ended straight jaws, 5.36, gut shot. I think he would have called all of those. He didn't, so he didn't have a hand. So let's get him out of the way. Uh, what about the next guy? The next guy, the small blind did call. So I think he is going to call with any pair. I think he's going to call with his open-ended straight draw, probably his gut shot. Um, 9-7, ace-4, ace-2. He's probably going to call with those. Um, I don't really think he's going to be calling with overcards. Um, yeah, I think that those are cards he's out of position with. I just think he's gonna, fold those. Now could be wrong. Said, and if I'm wrong, then we just go ahead and we update what we know about him. We update the assumptions. All right, so he calls. So against this range, we're at 70%. Turn was a 2 of diamonds. I don't think that changes anything. I think we're still ahead. And he checks to us. So again, I still think he's going to check. Now the question is, what should we do? Should we bet or should we check behind? I don't think this is something we should check behind. I think I still think he's going to be calling. If he doesn't think we have an overpair now, he's probably not. He's not going to change his mind on the turn. So I still think he's going to be calling with his pairs. He's going to call with his overpair and all this stuff. I think he's going to call the open and a straight draw. Gut shots now, I think he may call. So the gut shots make it like 100%. And basically, it would be his entire range at that point that he's calling. And I think since he checks, we can easily bet and get calls from worse. Get calls from the top pair. Over pairs, 9s and 10s, I think he still calls. I think there's a lot of hands still that we're going to get value from. So I think we should bet again. I did. I guess we should say, I bet 2/3. Is this a good bet size? I think so, because if he called a 2/3 bet on the flop thinking I don't have an overpair, I think he's going to call it again on the turn. He might be a player though that's going to look at it and say, okay, he fired basically 2/3 pot bets. Maybe he actually has something, or he can think that I'm overly aggressive. It's hard to say because I don't have a lot of information on him. I think 2/3 is okay. I think we could probably size down to half pot though. That will encourage the smaller pocket pairs to call a top pair. It looks like we made our play on the flop to try to get a fold. On the turn, we're unhappy that he called, so on the turn we don't have the guts to fire a larger bet size, so we kind of scale down. It's like this is our feeble attempt to try to get a fold. So I think half pot could have been okay. Now what's interesting is that he min raised, and the question is, what is he going to check raise with? I think he's going to check raise with sets and straights. Over pair, I think he's going to check raise. It's 9, 10, jacks, and queens. Although, it doesn't make sense to check raise with straight. Because the board's kind of dry. He can call and then lead out on the river, or check call the river, hope that I bet again. I'm going to take the straight out and say, I just don't think, it doesn't make sense for him to do that. I think a set's going to do this. I think set's going to wake up right now and raise. I guess I better include the straight. Because if he's going to do it with sets, he'll probably do it with the straight. I think he'll probably do it with an overpair. I think a top pair now is going to come alive. I think he's going to come alive with this check raise and try to take down the pot. Now, he kind of took a gamble that an overcard wasn't going to come. It didn't. So now he has to sweat, ace, king, queen, jacks, especially if he has, let's say, 9-8 or 10-8. So I think he could check raise with the top pair. Pocket pair below, a middle pair, weak pair. don't know. I don't think a lot of people are going to be check raising these hands. Um, and I don't think he's really going to be check raising gut shots anymore, but he could check raise the open ended straight draw. So now that two kind of gives him more outs and say, hey, I've got, let's look at those. 5-4. I've got a pair and I have an open ended straight draw. Let's check raise. If I fold, hey, that's great. But if I call, he still has outs. So I think we'll leave that in. So I've got 75% of his as a check raise. And against that range, we're still at 66%. So I think we have to call. Question is, could we go? Could we shove all in? I think if we shove all in, he's going to fold his open-ended straight draws. He'll probably fold his top pair too. It depends on the player. I think the over pairs will probably call. At least queens and jacks are going to call. Nines and tens may find a fold. Uh, Sets plus. So if it's just sets plus, we're at 3%. That's not good. If he does it with all his overpair, yeah, we're at 64%, but that's because it's made up of nines and tens. And if we think nines and tens are just going to fold, uh, you can see that we're right at 5%. So um, I think if we raise, and we get called, we're in a bad spot. Whereas if we just call now, it gives him a reason to bet the top pair again. Or if he checks, he may be willing to call a small bet on the river with 9-8, 10-8, and so forth. So I think a call is going to be a little bit better than check raising and risking our stack when we know if he calls, we're going to be beat. If we raise here, we're basically turning our jacks into a bluff. Because nothing that we beat will be calling. We're hoping that something we beat ends up folding. River was a 6. I think that hits some other hands, but gives more reason for some hands to call. So he shoves all in at this point, and the question is, what could he be doing this with? He check raised, so he called pre-flop, called the flop, called a 2/3 bet on the flop, and then check raised, min check raise, and then bets 47 big blinds on the river. We need 34% equity to call. Are we getting that? Whoops, hold on. That's not right. I see what I did. 47.2 divided by 47.2 plus 110.6. We needed about 30% equity to call. Do I think we have 30% equity? Probably. So I think he's going to probably still bet his overpair. I think he's still going to probably bet his top pair. But I think he needed to consider, what am I going to call that check raise with? I mean, on this board, really the only draw is that wheel draw out there. I mean, yeah, I could have 7-6 myself. And could be drawing to, that open ender. But I mean, it doesn't make sense for me to be calling with just ace, king, king, queen, jack. I mean, I've got something. I have a pair. So the question now becomes, is he brave enough to bet this with the top pair hand? Could he bet with middle pair, with the 7-6, and try to get a fold? Maybe. So if it's top pair plus, we're at 61%. If it's over pair, it's, if he's doing this with an over pair, oops, hold on. So if it's top pair plus, I'm at 55%. I have the equity to call. If he's doing this with an over pair, I'm only at 26%. So the question is he capable of doing it with the top pair hand? And could he do it with all of his top pair hands? And I think he's going to be top pair plus at that. And as I said on the turn, I'm not even confident that he would have check raised his straight, because the board's so dry. And I kind of feel the same way. I lean towards that with with three of a kind, with trips. Why would you check raise this dry board? Um, why not just check raise or lead the river? So I think I'm getting the equity needed to call, um, and I did. I went ahead and called, and he shows Ace King, which was not in his range at all. And I think that's kind of interesting because that means he's just launched a bluff. He didn't think that this board hit me at all, and he launched a complete bluff. So if he calls with Ace King, that's Ace King offsuit. Maybe he three bets with Ace King suited. Maybe he doesn't. This is three bets pre-flop. And then let's go back and take out some of these hands. So on the flop, then he calls, he check calls, and we're gonna have to add his ace high hand. And then the turn, when he check raises, I think we still have. If he does it with ace high, he's doing it with all of these, but it's probably not even all ace high hands. Maybe just ace queen are better. So take those out. We still have open end and straight draw. And then on the river, when we look at it, you can see clearly, if he's doing it with ace high, he's doing it with all of these things. Probably. It could be, he could be more polarized, so he's betting here with his ace high hands, but, checking the pairs because he knows that he has some showdown value. But even if we do two pair plus and the ace high hands, we're at 49%. We have the equity to call. So this is another situation where we just have to take a note on this player. We have to add the note to say that he did not 3-bet from small blind with ace king. And make a note that he check raised turn as a bluff. Check raised turn and fired river as a bluff with ace king. So that way, if he makes a play like this again, we could be a little bit more prepared. We will include then some bluff hands in his range. So these are two hands. Hopefully you enjoyed them. We missed, the hands, both of the hands, but it gave us information about how our opponent plays. All right, thanks for watching. Look tomorrow for a couple more hands.